Welcome everyone to Monday Match Analysis. I'm Gill Gross. Week 1 of Indian Wells is in the books, and this is going to be a notebook dump / Tales from the Booth episode. I am recording this on Sunday afternoon Pacific time. Many third round matches have been completed. We're not going to talk about any of them. We're strictly dealing with round 1 and round 2 stuff. And we're going to hit a lot of topics, whip around style. That's what a notebook dump is. The reason being, I'm in the middle of a very busy commentating stretch. I've been calling matches, Indian Wells matches on the Tennis Channel app. After tomorrow, I will go straight to Phoenix for the first day of the Arizona Tennis Classic, otherwise known as the Phoenix Challenger. I'll be calling matches on site there, which obviously changes my days a little bit. Spend a lot of time prepping for matches and commentating the matches, and I'm not often sitting down first ball to last, detailed notes for the kind of in-depth analysis that I usually do. But many of you love the notebook dump style stuff anyways, which is great. I enjoy it too. A little bit something different. We'll talk about some of the upsets. There have been a lot of upsets. Djokovic, I'll go into detail on that one. But we'll hit on the others as well, along with some stuff about the doubles crowds, some stuff about Nick Kyrgios retiring, predictions, updates. Now, the second half of the show is going to be Tales from the Booth. Some of you know this from Roland Garros, where I've done it 2 years in a row. For that segment, I'm just going to talk about the matches that I called and my observations from them. So we get a more random selection of players, although I've been doing the big stadiums mostly. And it's just kind of any match I've called, I'll comment on, which is kind of fun. Let's start with the conditions real quick, because that's how I started on my Indian Wells prediction video. We had the big news break a couple days before the tournament started, the switch from Plexipave to Lakehold. And there's a big curiosity of, okay, how are these courts going to play and what is going to change? And the answer is, it depends on who you ask. For example, Medvedev said they seem slower to me than before. Slowest court I've ever played on. That's what Medvedev said. Sabalenka said, I love the new courts. They are faster. Rybakina said they're not much faster, but the bounce is lower. I heard from Bjorn Fratangelo. He said the bounce was even higher than it was before. And then there's Alexander Zverev, who didn't even know that the surface was new after playing on it. So how am I interpreting all of this where the players are just completely contradicting each other? It's clearly not that much different, because if it were completely different, I think you'd get a little bit more consensus. And we also have some CPI numbers. The CPI, I got to pull it up on my Twitter because I did put it out there. The CPI, at least on Stadium 2, is 32.7, which is medium slow. So certainly that's slower than what Miami has been, certainly slower than the US Open. They clearly didn't speed it up as much as they intended to, which is really key wording that I use intentionally. Intended to. Because make no mistake, I've already talked about the press release, how I disagreed with the logic in there, but Tommy Haas did an interview with Tennis Channel where he kind of confirmed the sentiments of the press release and said, yeah, we are trying to make it closer to Miami. That was the goal here. It's a goal that I don't agree with. But what that means is they very well might just tell Lakehold for next year to take even more sand out of the paint, make the court surface smoother so that it's faster. All right, you have control over that. Lakehold knows what they're doing, and they have some control over that. So I really think my interpretation of what happened here is try number one, and they may have been on a time crunch. They may have been in a rush, such is the nature of a transition sometimes. My interpretation is they intended to speed it up, and they just didn't do they didn't do as good a job with it. Now, one thing, and I don't normally like to talk out of my behind, but I do have one other thing that I'll throw out there. I don't know enough about court surfaces and paints. I'm not an expert on this. So this is just me asking a question, putting it out into the world. But okay, tin cap Gill here. Gill's got his tin cap conspiracy. It's not really a conspiracy, but the white lines on a hard court, they always are smoother. That's why the ball skids when it hits off the line on a hard court. And for some reason, and Jim Courier has talked about this repeatedly, for some reason they haven't figured out a way to make the white paint play the same as the rest of the court paint. Why is the ball skidding off the line? It should be the same hard court surface. So if that is the case, and the white paint is really, really speedy, and nobody can seem to do anything about it, is it possible that the green paint, whatever the color of Indian Wells courts are, is it the color that makes it slow? So Lake Cold tried to make it fast, but they didn't want to change the color, and it's still slow because the paint is slow. I don't know. I'm just throwing an idea out there. All right? We'll get to actual tennis stuff, talk about the Djokovic upset, the Zverev upset. But first, I want to introduce you to my favorite Monday Match Analysis sponsor of all time, Go Sport. And I say that for a couple of reasons. One, they make an incredible tennis product, the best tennis bag I have ever owned. Superior organization, extreme durability. The material just feels nice and expensive. And also visually, a sleek design that matches all rackets, which is important to me because I kind of have OCD about the racket brand being different than the bag brand. The other reason that this is just, I love Go Sport, is that I personally relate to this brand. You see, when I started Monday Match Analysis, I decided to keep my focus very narrow. And I saw a problem in tennis media, which is that there was not enough in-depth match breakdowns, and I dedicated myself to solving that problem. So I was going to do one sport, one match, and I was going to go into more detail than 99% of what was out there. And I didn't have investors or corporate backing or even a producer, but I trusted the quality of the work, and it's taken me as far as I've gotten. Well, I've gotten to know Chris, the founder of Go Sport, a little bit, and his story is basically the same. He is in a family of tennis players. They got frustrated with the tennis bag market, felt like they could do a lot of things better, and they decided to do something about it. Go Sport is a family business that focuses just on tennis bags, so they're able to do it better than all the other big brands out there who are juggling 70 or rather like 200 products at one time. Welcome to the trunk of my car, where I'm going to show you how I organize my Axiom bag. So first of all, this thing stands up all on its own. I've unzipped everything, so let me show you around. We've got some side pockets. I always keep a couple of cans of tennis balls in here. This bag holds 9 rackets, but I usually carry around 2, and they go right there. This top compartment right here is specially designed to carry shoes and clothes because it has such great ventilation. Most of the magic happens in this main compartment because these shelves right here are customizable. You can configure these however you'd like. I have this kind of little slim compartment down here where I like to hold my massage gun, which other than my rackets are probably the most important thing in here. My water bottle's right down there, and I like to keep my phone and my wallet up there, so that's where you're going. Go to gosport.com, use the code GILL10 for a 10% discount on your order. That is GoSport, GEAU. GEAU. All right. Let's go to Novak Djokovic, who loses to Botic van de Zandschulp in 3 sets. I'll get to Botic in a second, but let's start on Novak. You should never be surprised when Novak Djokovic loses in March. You just shouldn't. Nor should you take away a lot from it. And I kind of feel like a broken record on this because I've had to do this what feels like each of the last 4 or 5 years. Not always at Indian Wells, sometimes at Monte Carlo. But you've had these surprising Djokovic losses on paper this time of year consistently. And a lot of these losses have not aged well. The Luca Nardi loss last year at Indian Wells, that did not age well. Luca Nardi at tour level won 2 more matches the rest of the year. Novak Djokovic has not been to a quarterfinal at the Sunshine Double, either Indian Wells or Miami, since 2016. when he won both. He's had a lot of success at both events, but not in a long time. It has been 9 years since he's even made a last 8, which is staggering at this point. And yes, the sample size is smaller because he's missed these events on a somewhat disproportional basis. But there are, first of all, I think enough, there's a big enough sample size where it's a real thing. And there's also logic behind it, right? How many times does Novak Djokovic need to say that my goal now is to peak for the slams and that's what I care about? How many times does he need to say that for us to like actually buy in and start to take it seriously? Because I take it seriously. I think everybody should. He grinds for January. He grinds in January. He's been phenomenal. Deep runs at the Australian Open every single time for the last 15 years, basically. Dennis Istomin, shout out, other than that. Right? And what we've had in recent years in post-physical prime Djokovic, he needs to rest in February. He cannot keep the on switch. He cannot maintain the fitness for 11 months out of the year. It's not sustainable. So he rests in February and he lacks fitness in March. And that's what happens here. And it's a combination of, again, body preservation, the reality of being past 35 years old, or honestly, anytime I think you get like north of 32, you have to start doing these things. You have to change the way you manage your body. And then there's the motivational decline, which just has to do with all of the accomplishments he's racked up, getting to the point where he's no longer gunning for Masters 1000 titles. Body preservation and motivation decline. It's been a deadly combination for March, and he does not play well in March. But my main point is, it doesn't usually mean anything. In 2017, and I want to go through all of them since 2016 because it's only fair that we look at the context a little bit. In 2017, he lost to Nick Kyrgios at Indian Wells, and he actually did have a rough season that year. So it did mean something, technically. 2018, he lost to Taro Daniel. He was still in a bad spell at that point, but he got it back and he won Wimbledon that year. 2019, he lost to Philip Kohlschreiber. And in between that Philip Kohlschreiber loss, he won the Australian Open, made the semis at Roland Garros, and won Wimbledon. So what does that tell you about the Philip Kohlschreiber loss? It didn't tell you anything about where Novak was at. All it told you is that he probably took a real good rest, a real good vacation in February. I know there was some political stuff happening at that time that he said distracted him as well. He didn't play it again until last year. Last year, he loses to Luca Nardi. And then what do we get by the time he sort of builds himself up over the course of the clay court season, which admittedly took a long time for him to do? We get a walkover at Roland Garros in the quarters. We get a Wimbledon final and an Olympic gold. So at a certain point in the season, we still got a peak level. We still got an elite level from Novak Djokovic. Maybe not quite as high as he would like, but it got up there, right? He wouldn't have lost to Luca Nardi in June, right? Or July. Wasn't going to lose to Luca Nardi at that point. In Miami, he hasn't played since 2019. He has literally won 8 slams since he played Miami. That's what it means. And Monte Carlo has been a similar thing. So that's my Djokovic thing on the calendar spot. You know, I think for a loss at Indian Wells to trigger like, oh, let's evaluate where Djokovic is at in his career right now and what level he's capable of. Like, that's just silly to me. I'm sorry. If you want to take a look, if you want to pick apart the fact that 2 out of the last 3 slams he's had an injury, yes, sure, absolutely. Or if you want to look at his level, in a large sample size over the course of the last 2 years, fair game. But if you want to like actually care about Indian Wells for Djokovic, I don't think that makes any sense because I don't think Novak cares that much. Now, he competed hard, and he brought Andy Murray over, so I think he wanted it, and you could tell when he was playing the match, he wanted it. But my main point here is that it's not about how much he wants it when he arrives on site ready to play the match. It also matters, what did the buildup look like? What did February look like? First half of February, we know he wasn't doing much because he was recovering from the injury. Let's hit on Botic. He played great in the third set. I thought in the first set, Novak was so bad you couldn't really tell much. But in the third set, Botic impressed me. He was defending really hard. It's crazy how well he can move sometimes, but it doesn't seem consistent. His backhand, he was trading it way better than usual. Good speeds, very dependable. And the forehand, I think, is great for these courts. When he's got time on the ball and he's got a high bounce, his forehand is really, really heavy and difficult to read, even though the technique is bizarre. So he played well. And look, he's not a great server. Novak's return was probably the worst part of his game against Van de Zandschulp. So he didn't really get punished for his, I guess, serving level, which is typically kind of average. But Botic has had a weird stretch here. This is bizarre stuff. I mean, in the last 7 months, he's beaten Alcaraz at the U.S. Open. He beats Nadal in his last ever match. And he beats Novak Djokovic. And it's crazy because Botic hasn't played well in the last 7 months. He's beaten these three legends. Contextually, none of them are jaw-dropping shocks. I think with Alcaraz, you didn't think he was going to lose that match. With Nadal, you kind of did. You kind of did think he'd lose it. And this match, again, you didn't think he was going to lose it, but again, like, you're not, in my opinion, you shouldn't be stunned. Okay. He's got to back it up, though. If he doesn't back it up, it doesn't mean much, because Botic has not been to a tour-level quarterfinal in his last 50 tournaments. Going back to Munich 2023, when he was up 5-2 in the final. It might have been 5-1, I forget now, against Holger Rune in Munich, and should have won his first career title and didn't. He hasn't been back to a quarterfinal, 50 events. He is also still on a rather frustrating 27-match losing streak in ATP main draw matches when he loses the first set. Although he did come back in a match in the first round of qualifying. But speaking of qualifying, he lost in the second round of qualifying here in Indian Wells. So he's a lucky loser, just like Luca Nardi was when he beat Djokovic last year. So it's very odd. Botic has these massive high-profile wins, but he's not playing that well. It's strange. That's all I have to say. Zverev Griekspoor. That's an interesting one. It was a 6-1 head-to-head for Zverev, but 2 third-set tiebreaks last year. Actually, that's wrong. 2 deciding set tiebreaks last year. One of them came at Roland Garros. Griekspoor, my only big takeaway from this match, not my only big takeaway, but my main big takeaway, Griekspoor tried really hard to blow this one, but he was so clearly better than Zverev that he was able to create opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. Talon has some trouble with the nerves. There is no doubt about it. He finds himself in these close matches against top players. He's had a lot of heartbreakers. And on one hand, you're like, oh, wow, like this is good stuff from Griekspoor. He's playing all these top 10 players close. And then you kind of look at it and you're like, man, like, how are you not winning any of these? Well, first of all, it's great to see him get 2 in the last 2 weeks. He beats Medvedev. He beats Zverev. It's especially impressive because I think these courts are too slow typically for what Griekspoor likes. But he blew a lot of opportunities here against Zverev. Down the stretch of the third set, he just kept earning chance after chance after chance because he was taking it to Zverev. And for Sasha, it was unbelievably passive, just feeding Griekspoor short approach shot forehands on a regular basis. The first serve of Zverev was not doing much at all, even though Griekspoor typically isn't the best defensive returner. And like Griekspoor is clinical in attack. He is a very good transition player. And if you play passive against him, give him time on the forehand and give him short balls, he's going to finish some net approaches against you. That's what he did, just enough. after many match points come and gone where, there was some shakiness, let's just say. But I'm telling you, with Zverev, this number one thing is not good for his psyche, nor was what happened at the Australian Open. So that gets me to one question that I want to watch, or that I want to answer. It's obviously rhetorical since I'm doing a solo podcast right now. But what of the upsets we've seen at Indian Wells, which were the most surprising / disappointing? And obviously, the top names and the best players here traditionally are Novak and Zverev. But I just went over Novak and how I don't think you should ever be surprised when he loses in March. And this Zverev dip to me also feels pretty predictable. And I don't know if it's the Australian Open scarring, like if that took a chunk out of his confidence. It certainly sounded like it did after the match. Or if it's the number one thing and he's just that extra pressure it's not good for a tennis player, which was, by the way, one of the things that was so impressive about what Iga Swiatek did when Ash Barty retired. I thought that was going to be tough for Iga. Like suddenly, all right, you're number one, like go. And it was like out of nowhere. And then she actually just went on an absolute tear. I thought that was really impressive. That's not really normal though. And I don't know which it is for Zverev, but he's not playing a good level. Now, the generous reading is that he was ill in February and that Griekspoor plays him close always. So lost a tight one to Griekspoor, who's been dangerous against him and wasn't physically well in February. You can read it that way, but let's see what happens because he hasn't looked like himself at all. I actually think the more surprising / disappointing performances among the upsets are kind of the lower guys, the tier twos, so to speak. FAA, Ruud, Rublev. For Felix, I've loved his level. Auger-Aliassime's worst two tournaments this year are Australian Open and Indian Wells. He has been killer week in and week out. Every single event. 3 finals already this year. Leads the tour in wins. And the outlier performances for Felix are the Slam and the 1000. And that in itself is kind of disappointing if you're FAA. Didn't get to see much of that match, by the way. Ruud, same thing. But actually, this is true for all of these matches. I didn't get to see that much of it. So I'm kind of reacting to the result, not so much analyzing the tennis itself. But for Rublev, what I kind of want to flag with Andre is he started to follow this, and I'm going to do a deep cut here. It's kind of like the 2021 Basilashvili arc. I mean, what I mean by that is he's losing the first round a lot. And like last year, Rublev went on 2 separate 4-match losing streaks. And then he's also having some great weeks. Wins Madrid, makes the final of Canada, wins Dubai. Right? You have these great runs in there for Rublev. That is not normal for him. I know right now with recency bias, it might feel like it's normal for him. I would strongly suggest taking a look at the numbers, the facts with Rublev, and look at what he did from 2020 to 2023. So I'm talking 4 years of results here, and tell me that's not consistency. You don't make 10 major quarterfinals if you get upset a lot early. The Andrei Rublev of old, he does not get upset a lot early. He has a ton of trouble punching up above his weight and beating the big guns, but he always puts himself there. Totally different story with Rublev in the last year, where he's actually having explosive runs, but he's getting upset all the time on a regular basis. FAA losing to Jensen Brooksby. Andrei Rublev falling to Matteo Arnaldi, who I love, by the way. I think Arnaldi at his best is a lot to handle. I really only saw the last couple games, so I don't even want to talk about what I saw in the last couple games, but because to me it's too small a little segment. But Rublev lost first round in Doha. Rublev lost first round in Dubai after winning Doha. That I said, okay, you just won a title. Whatever, it happens a lot. To lose first round again here, now you start to feel like the Dubai thing was not the start of something, was not the first building block for sort of a Rublev resurgence. Then there's Ruud, and I said it before this year. This was interesting because I picked Ruud to the semifinals pre-tournament, and I'll update my predictions in a moment here, which kind of goes against my preseason conviction, where I just haven't liked the fact that Ruud on hard court has regressed since 2022 when he was really good on hard court. And to me, what's disappointing about the loss here for Ruud is that these should be great conditions for him. With the height of bounce, this should be the hard court that Ruud doesn't mind, one that he actually likes. He's up huge in the first set. That gets away from him. The third totally gets away from him. He loses the third 6-2 against Marcos Giron, who is capable, but that's not a terrible draw. And I don't even look at Giron the same way that I look at like a Matteo Arnaldi. It's a tough one. It's a tough one for Casper in my view, because this should be a hard court event where the conditions actually work for him. So predictions update. I've lost one semifinalist. I've lost a whole bunch of quarterfinalists. I'm usually pretty good about taking February with a grain of salt. I noticed I didn't do it very much this time around. I actually put a lot of weight into some of the February stuff that I saw. Now for Tsitsipas, it may be correct. He did beat Matteo Berrettini this morning, so he's through to the fourth round. It may be that it was correct to kind of go off of what I saw in Dubai. And somebody commented on my YouTube video, total recency bias, right? And my response was, hell yeah, it's recency bias. I would have never, ever picked Tsitsipas to the final if not for that 1 week. But when somebody makes some dramatic changes and then the results flip, that's where I think recency bias is very much okay. Okay, you've changed something. You are now confident. You are now feeling fresh. You feel like you're a new player, a different player. I'm sure that's how Tsitsipas feels right now. He's playing like it, at least. Zverev struggles in February translated, but Rublev, as we mentioned, FAA, as we mentioned, these are guys who had some positive stuff in February. Unfortunately, Ruud got sick in Acapulco, so you're not really counting him. But it's just interesting to see. It's always interesting to see, in my opinion, how much do February results matter? And the reason why I sort of have a bias against the month, first of all, the tour is so stratified across different events that sometimes luck of the draw can play a role in what kind of results you're accumulating. But more so, I think motivationally, it's one of those months where you get a big range. Anyway, I think Medvedev or Tommy Paul will come out of the Ruud section. I actually think Daniil's level has been pretty good. So I'm picking him. And again, I said this with Tom Corey in our data dive. If you haven't seen that, check it out. I thought in Doha and Dubai, I think Daniil played pretty well, despite the quarterfinal exits. So I'm going to go with him now that Ruud has been defeated. Want to hit on two subjects before we go to Tales from the Booth. The first being Kyrgios' retirement. The crazy thing is I thought it was 50-50 that he would finish the match. And I feel bad for him. I do. I don't know how could you watch somebody struggle this much with an injury and work so hard to come back and it not really happen for them? How could you see that and not feel bad, right? At the same time, I don't know what he thinks is going to happen. I'm confused at the moment. Because when you've had an injury for 2 years, it's really been like a year and a half, very long process to come back. And then you come back in January and it's not really healed yet. Like, you could tell the wrist isn't there yet. And you've tested it and you've gotten that feedback, and then you're coming back and you're playing Indian Wells. And again, the wrist, it's not healed yet. It strikes me as a player who is injured, who has not healed, who is now taking the court to play matches, and then is, from the very start of these matches, uncompetitive, or at least severely compromised. So what I don't understand is when he comes out onto court, what exactly is he expecting? I don't understand, because it feels like he's lost these matches before they even begin. The wrist thing is bleak right now. I think he would tell you that, because it's been a long time for that to get better, and it doesn't seem to be getting good enough, at least, to compete at the very highest level. So that's all I got on Nick Kyrgios right now. There's one thing that I was seeing on social media, and I'll end on this before Tales from the Booth, doubles crowds. There's this thing on the internet where people are posting big doubles crowds and small singles crowds as a way to kind of prove a point that the doubles product works, as a way of kind of dunking on some of the, more vocal doubles naysayers, whether that be Riley Opelka or Andy Roddick or whoever, right? And to me, I just want to say, this social media trend is dumb. I'm going to try to go quick on this, because I don't love doing a whole segment that's just a response to some stuff that I saw on social media. But here's why I think it's important to actually talk about this. As someone who doesn't want doubles to go away, that's me. I want doubles to succeed. I want it to work. The mindset of there's no problem here, everything is totally okay, let me show everybody that doubles is working as a product, that's the mindset that will kill doubles long term. That if you're trying to champion doubles and that's the way you're doing it, for me, you're simultaneously killing doubles, because it's the complacency, it's the this is working, we are fine attitude. That's the problem for me, because there's stuff to work with the product, but the fact is, with the crowd thing, you can cherry pick here and there, but ultimately you're not going to win that battle, because Stadium 1 is 16,000 seats, Stadium 2 is 8,000 seats at Indian Wells, and sure, when 2,000 people are in Stadium 2, it looks empty. When the same 2,000 people are on Stadium 5, it looks full. First of all, that's just not a good point from a mathematical perspective, but also we know how it is at the end of the tournament. Doubles isn't filling these big stadiums, selling these expensive stadium tickets at the end of the event, putting people in these, expensive suites at the end of the event. Singles is doing that. So, can doubles drive good TV ratings to the partners? Can doubles drive consistent social media traffic? Can doubles sell tennis TV and tennis channel app subscriptions? If the answer to all of those questions was yes, that's where you'd have an argument that, okay, there's no problem here, and everybody who says there's a problem is just a hater. That's not true. That's not true. There is a real problem. Let's focus on solutions, not being in denial about the fact that there's a problem. All right. Tales from the Booth. Again, these are matches that I called. I'm going to run through them. Alexander Bublik against Yosuke Watanuki. First thing, Watanuki is so relaxed out there. He is really fun to watch because he enjoys the tennis. He is incredibly expressive. He'd be the worst poker player in the world. He hit 20 forehand winners against Bublik. He was way more dynamic as a mover and a ball striker in the rallies. His offensive skill set is really very vast. He can hurt you in a lot of different ways. Forehand is really big. He comes forward. His hands are good. The weakness for Watanuki seems to be return and defense. We'll get a little bit more into some of that stuff. But he didn't really have to play much defense against Bublik's passive baseline style. And this is something that can get lost if you don't pay close attention to Bublik. For as big as his serve is and for as big as his body is, he is a pretty soft ball striker, meaning, not a big ground stroke speed guy, doesn't hug the baseline, actually doesn't take much time away, generally, positionally. And as a result, Watanuki was very much in control of basically every single rally. Slightly exaggerating there, but you know what I mean. Bublik looked kind of lost. He just can't get himself to consistently compete right now, which is tough because his ranking is slipping pretty badly. The serve is not making up the difference recently. I think Bublik has always been a pretty flawed baseliner, given the movement and the lack of disruptive baseline power. Been a pretty flawed baseliner. But, by the way, he moves pretty well for his height. He just doesn't move well for a guy who doesn't hit hard, if you know what I mean. The first serve percentage is low. Second serve numbers are awful. They are the worst second serve numbers in the top 50, in the top 100. So you look at Alexander Bublik as a high double fault guy, which is okay, but the underlying numbers of are you winning second serve points are very bad. So he is not getting the proper kind of risk-reward balance out of sometimes going after his second serve. And part of that is because sometimes he's not going after the second serve. He's just double faulting because he doesn't really have a kick serve. I think Bublik now is 2-8 on the year. Hasn't been good. All right, Tien versus Navone. And by the way, I'm just going to warn you right now, I've called a lot of straight set matches, not a lot of good close matches. Tien-Navone. First thing is I felt so bad for Lerner-Tien here. I mean, it's just the most miserable Indian Wells debut you could imagine for a Southern California guy, Southern California kid, I'll still call him a kid right now, who grew up going to this tournament. It was freezing cold. It was raining. There was nobody there because it was the last match on Stadium 2. He's probably envisioned his Indian Wells debut his entire life, and it looked nothing like this. He was also very sick. He was coughing up a storm. He didn't have his usual discipline or composure. And, the slow nighttime conditions and the physical edge was just perfect for Navone, who on paper hasn't done anything really on hardcourt other than beat other guys who don't like hardcourt. Like, he's beaten Luciano Dartari. He's beaten Thiago Montero. He beat Manarino at the start of this year, and Adrian isn't winning at all. Like, he doesn't have a good hardcourt win. This was on paper the best hardcourt win of Navone's career. But certainly Tien's physical condition had a lot to do with it. Now, I thought the rain delay might save him. I didn't see the match when it resumed, and Navone finished the deal in straights, but that was probably actually really bad luck for Navone that it rained. Didn't matter. He still won the match. Crazy sportsmanship by Lerner-Tien at 6-5 in the first set. I know you usually don't get this from me, but we're going to do a little sportsmanship analysis. Navone is serving for the opening set, and it is raining. A moderate rain. It's not a light drizzle. Like, I don't know. It's raining enough where I think I've been watching the sport long enough. 80% of players would have stopped and at least asked the chair umpire to come down and check the lines or say, hey, it's slippery. This isn't, the court. It's slippery. It would have been a perfect time to disrupt. I'm not advocating for this. It would have been a perfect time to disrupt Navone, who is serving for the set. And Lerner was quiet as a church mouse. I swear to God, I believe 90% of players would not have handled that like Tien. And they would have been like, all right. Because you couldn't have said in that moment, if Tien asked the chair umpire to check the court, you couldn't have been like, oh, that's horrible sportsmanship. Because when it comes to rain, like, this is about safety. And it's hard to fault a player for not wanting to play once the courts get a little bit wet. And yet, Tien never lobbied for the match to stop. He complained a little bit after Navone held to take the first set 7-5, but nothing before that, which I thought was just classic, window into Lerner-Tien's character. So I wanted to say that. Arthur Fils against Gabriel Diallo, the 6'8" Canadian. Really awesome returning from Fils in this match. Lots of athletic stretch returns, totally neutralized Diallo's serve, albeit in cold nighttime conditions. Well, afternoon to night conditions. But look, I think Fils, at times I've watched him against big servers, I felt he's really struggled to make enough returns in play. Not the case at all against Diallo here. And then he just dominated him from the back of the court, which you would kind of expect. I thought he felt pretty comfortable playing high percentage for the most part, because Diallo's movement doesn't exactly squeeze Fils to the point where he feels like he needs to go for more aggressive targets in order to generate damage. So Fils had a great mindset in this match, particularly on return, just knowing if I make returns and I patiently construct points from the baseline, I'm going to have the upper hand. Diallo is still raw. I think the tools are great because for 6'8", I really like his footwork. That's my favorite part of Diallo. But the backhand is very low margin. He struggles when it's low. It's better when it's high up because it's flat. And there's nothing wrong with his forehand. It's a good forehand, but it kind of needs to be great, given the backhand and the movement, right? You think about Matteo Berrettini. How has he been able to be a top 10 player without a good drive backhand? Because his serve is great and his forehand is great. Well, backhand and movement, right? So you have two. Not a very good backhand, not a very good mover. How can you still be great? You've got to have massive weapons. And ultimately, I think Gabriel is pretty far away. For a 6'8" guy, his weapons need to be better. He's got more development to go. And one thing that he's doing admirably is coming in, which is how he should play. And I'm confident it's going to pay off for him at some point, but his volleys right now are bad. They are bad. He volleys deep way too much, and it just felt like Fils had a look at a pass almost every time Diallo was in because he just wasn't doing enough when he had a chance to finish up at the net. Now, I called another Yosuke Watanuki match, this time against Tomas Machac. Tomas won the first set, and I said it on the air in the moment that he was playing at 70% intensity at best. And it was just weird. I'm like, is he bored? Like, what is wrong with Tomas Machac? And then he started kind of bending over after some points, and then it became clear, okay, he's feeling it physically in some capacity. Wasn't grabbing any part of his body, so the assumption is that it's basically illness. But I told my producer, I said, I think he's going to retire. And mind you, this was after he won the first set. And lo and behold, he retires. Machac retires at 4-2 in the second set. That is 6 Tomas Machac retirements since the U.S. Open last year. 6 since the U.S. Open last year. And obviously, he's coming off of the biggest week of his career, the title in Acapulco, which is, it's kind of ironic that he retires with illness. I think illness here, because he was like one of the only guys to survive this pervasive Acapulco illness. Then he's going to get sick at the very next tournament. Or maybe he spent too much time in Acapulco celebrating and he ate or drank whatever the rest of them were eating and drinking. I don't know. But he did have 6 days after winning Acapulco before this match against Watanuki. So you can't make a great argument that he should have been like, I don't know, had a recovery problem. But ultimately, the start of 2025 confirms what I've felt about Machac. The tennis, when he's engaged, is top 10. At least borderline top 10. But mentally and physically, well, mentally, you get a lot of volatility. Physically, you get a lot of no-shows. And that's why week to week, you're not really going to get consistency right now from the Czech. Big, huge result for Watanuki. How about the story with this? And by the way, I tweeted this after the first time I called a Watanuki match to start the week. I said, if Watanuki maintains a top 100 ranking for any amount of time, he's going to gain fans quickly. He is a lovable guy to watch. I mean, really fun to watch. And he missed 7 months last year with an injury, entered this week on a protected ranking to get into qualifying. And now he's through to the third round. He's going to play Francis Tiafoe. He played Tiafoe in Miami. I don't know if I should be getting into this because it's all going to be dated, but he played Tiafoe in Miami 2 years ago. I was at that match. It was one of the most randomly incredible matches I have ever seen. And anybody who watched that match will agree with what I just said. It is a little odd for Yosuke. He's 26 years old. He had a cup of tea in the top 100, but he hasn't stayed there. He's made one quarterfinal in his career at the ATP level. And it's just surprising sometimes when you see how good some of his skills are. But I guess the serve return skills can hold him back. I think on the return, especially on the forehand, it's not very compact. And I think if you serve well into his forehand, you get a lot of cheap points. The serve, it's some of the strangest technique you'll ever see. There are a ton of things that he does that a coach would tell you never do. It's very odd technique that probably holds his serve back in a lot of ways. Fitness, I don't know about the fitness. And then he's probably pretty error prone on bad days. Now, I've mostly watched Watanuki on good days where he's ripping winners from the back like nobody's business. But I imagine based on his play style and based on his results that sometimes the balls aren't finding the court. Speaking of balls finding the court, I was multitasking during Draper-Fonseca, but obviously that was a blockbuster second round match, and Draper wins a tight first, then he wins a 6-love second, and there's a massive gap in consistency there, clearly. If you look at the ground stroke speeds stats, Fonseca, 10 miles per hour faster on the forehand, about 10 miles per hour faster on the backhand. Like, he's hitting way bigger. Doesn't matter, right? Again, Draper is gonna have a massive, and I said this, I'm not even going to say I said this because it was so obvious, but for Draper, there's a huge serve advantage, and there's a huge consistency advantage. And Jack is one of these guys who shock absorbs and defends at the highest level. It's the matchup that I think right now Fonseca is going to have the most trouble with. The guys who will take on the pace and will maintain baseline consistency, depth off the ground, high level of shot tolerance. I don't think Joao is ready to hang with that kind of player. Not at that level. And I think what really stood out from what I saw, windy day, by the way. It's been windy at Indian Wells. How many balls did Fonseca hit clean and miss by 1 to 3 ball lengths? I mean, so many. So many. When I have praised Fonseca in the past, I've talked about his level of power and how he doesn't need to hit to aggressive targets always. He can hit to big targets towards the middle of the court and still create damage, still force errors, still draw short balls, which is literally the best part about power. Best part about having power is you can hit to big targets and still do damage. Maybe it was because of the pressure he felt from Draper. He didn't hit to big targets in this match. He hit to very small targets. And that's why you got these tiny misses on ideal contact. He shouldn't be missing so much when he hits center of the strings, perfectly on balance, great contact point. When those three things are all right and he's missing, he went for too much. And I saw so many misses from Joao in this one where he went for too much. And in that sense, with the consistency issues, this match was all of Fonseca's weaknesses just amplified to the max. And Jack, he's playing awesome. He's going to be tough to beat, especially because his forehand jumps off of these courts really nicely. He's getting good action off the court, good jump off the court on his serve as well. He's going to be a handful. All right, I called Shelton versus Navone. I don't know why I said it like that. Navone. Ben just blasted him off the court. Clearly, Shelton, it looked like he had waited his whole life to come out and play this match, which it probably feels like your whole life when you arrive on site, who knows how early, and then you don't play your first match until Saturday because you were a seed and you got to bye. And Saturday night, no less. Ben came out, adrenaline through the roof, breaking the radar gun on serve and on his forehand, and sometimes just missing wildly. And I was calling the match and saying, like, if you made a compilation of Ben's worst shots, it would look really, really bad. Like, that's how many times he missed by 10 feet. But as soon as he harnessed it, and I think calmed down and settled in a bit, it was over. It was over with that firepower. Shelton's serving is fascinating because there's always this balance of how much am I using the variety, how much am I using the fastball. And in the first set, whenever he tried to flatten out his serve, he missed, like, every time. But the nice thing is that his kick is so great, his slice is so great, he can use those serves as a second serve. He can use those serves when he really needs to make a first or really wants to make a first, and they're effective. And he can make them every time. What Ben needs to improve is the accuracy on his fastball. When he serves 130, can he be accurate at those speeds? That's where he is not yet at the level, in my opinion, of GMP. We won't even talk about. He's on another level. But even that's where he's not on the level of even a Hubert Hurkacz. Once he's able to locate the heater, the flat serve, he's going to be the second best server in tennis. I think long-term, he should become at some point the second best server in tennis, but he's not even close to there yet. I think I'd probably rank him between, 6 and 10. I'm not sure exactly where, but between 6 and 10. He should be 2. I think when he fully develops, he's going to be 2. But yeah, he could hit the kick serve and volley against Navone because Mariano was so far back and it was money. And then the slice serve, Navone really couldn't cut it off at all because he's a small guy standing deep. If you're a small guy standing deep and Shelton is hitting slice serves on the ad side, I don't know how you're supposed to do anything about that. It's different when it's Jannik Sinner with the 6'4" long arms standing tighter. He can cut off that wide serve. Navone can't. And then the forehand can be nuclear. Nighttime conditions, doesn't matter. One more match. We finish on Monfils over Korda. This was an interesting one, especially because, well, let me save that. I'll start by saying Gill had a pretty bad serving match, which was not happening in January. He was serving the lights out all throughout January. But the first serve was MIA until the first set tiebreak, and then it turned on. And then in the second set, he got double faultitis. And that's the reason why largely the reason why the second set went to a tiebreak. Monfils even served for the match and got broken with a 2 double fault game. He got broken twice in the second set with a pair of 2 double fault games. And from the baseline, Korda was definitely in attack more. He was taking the ball pretty early. He was hitting 2 aggressive targets. He was changing direction a lot. Korda's not a guy who likes to blast the ball, but he does maintain some solid speeds and he'll move the ball around. The way Monfils is moving is really impressive. And again, Indian Wells at night, it's slow, but the way he was able to kind of extend points into errors, even when Korda was sitting there middle of the court dictating and moving Gale from right to left to right to left. And the fact that you have a 38-year-old out here saying, okay, like, I'll go corner to corner and eventually get the error. That's kind of what was happening here from the back. Now, Korda last year, I'll give you the numbers, 104th out of 128 players in forehand consistency, 98th in backhand consistency. So if you aren't consistent and you aren't finishing with ease, that's trouble. And he wasn't finishing with ease because Monfils' movement was so good around the court. Korda kind of had to come in in order to finish points. But too often, Gill was at least able to keep him on the baseline. And the defense from Monfils and extending rallies into Korda misses. Emotionally, this was an interesting matchup as well because Monfils and Korda, they're kind of the opposites. If you're going to praise Seb for his mental, it's because he's very calm and he's very flatline. It's good and admirable sometimes, but you don't get those nice highs in big moments. I thought Monfils played with a little bit more energy. It was a very high-quality second-set tiebreak, I will say, and Korda actually kind of ramped it up a little bit. But I think for the most part, Gill will turn it up to a 10 at times. And when he feels momentum and confidence, he'll furrow his brow, and he'll start kind of celebrating after points, and he'll get a swagger about him. And he turned that switch on at the perfect times in this match. He played 2 10 out of 10 tiebreaks. Exceptional. You don't see that as much from Korda. He's not known as a clutch player. And sometimes we say, well, in order to be great in big moments, you've got to be really, really calm. I don't know. Maybe you challenge that. Gill Monfils isn't calm in big moments. He is elevated in big moments. He rises. He raises all of his energy and his adrenaline and his intensity output, right? And there's definite advantages to doing that as well. Now, lastly, we got to talk about the health storyline for Korda because unfortunately, it's not great. This has been another bad stretch where he had elbow surgery after the U.S. Open last year, played the final to start the year in Adelaide, had a good draw, but he made the final. And then he lost second round to Vukic at the Australian Open. That was a disappointing defeat. Then he played in Marseille at the start of February, lost first round there. Then we didn't see him until this match. There's no information out there about what was going on. I don't know what was happening. But he's 25 in the world. That's his ranking. He's trying to stay seated at slams. I imagine that the fact that he didn't play in February was not by choice. Could be wrong, but I imagine he wanted to play. And there was some physical issue that was keeping him out of tournaments like Dallas and Acapulco. I think. And again, I don't know what the injury was, but he was bothered by his right wrist late in this match, which is another thing that he's had issues with in the past. He was stretching it out. He was focused on it. Not good, man. I just want so badly for Korda's sake. I want so badly for him to have to, get to stop thinking about his body. But he's one of those guys who continues to have these health issues pop up here and there consistently, which has certainly affected him negatively. So that's it for me, everybody. I will not be back on here until after the final for Monday Match Analysis because I got to call Phoenix, and those are long days. Might do some stuff on Instagram, and for that, follow me at Gill Gross _, but definitely do that no matter what. But even with content, can't even promise much there because at the end of the day, it's basically impossible for me to watch a ton of these matches at Indian Wells. Once Phoenix ends, I'll catch up on the semis and, of course, the final, and I'll be back with Monday Match Analysis then. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.